Hi, Jessica. Nice to see you today.
Hi.
Today, we're going to get to know you a little bit better. And so I'm looking forward to asking you some more personal questions along with what you do for Master Books and about where faith grows. So we've got a lot to cover. So let's just jump right in. So you are on the marketing team. And part of what you do is you are the social media manager. And so that involves really quite a bit of work. And part of that work is the lead admin of the Moms and Master Books, which is our very interactive Facebook group. And I have a feeling that keeps you pretty busy. So, can you tell us just a little bit about what you do with the Moms and Master Books and the other responsibilities you have as a social media manager?
Yes. Definitely, I am very busy with the Moms of Master Books. The group is currently at almost 35,000 members. So it's definitely not a small group. Um, Part of what I do in the group is I review the posts and the comments. I make sure that the questions are being answered, kind of offer a basic level of customer service. I also schedule and interact with some of the moderators. I create content, posts, graphics. Essentially, daily, I'm just coming alongside moms. I encourage them as they're navigating their homeschooling, all the questions that they have related to that. So, really, it's quite a wide range of what I'm doing in the group. In addition to what I do in Moms of Master Books, I also do some other things for Master Books, like I do review the catalog before that goes out. I work closely with the entire team, so I kind of keep up to date with where projects are standing. I facilitate a group that does early testing of product so we can get some feedback. And then things like making this summit a reality. So I've been working behind the scenes to get this out to our customers.
Yeah, you do quite a bit. And I know sometimes we also throw some other things at you, like taking some first peeks at some courses and just giving us some quick feedback on how you think the direction is going. So you do quite a bit behind the scenes, not to mention you've had to become quite the expert on all things Master Books curriculum.
Yes, that's true.
Well, tell me briefly about your own homeschooling journey because you are a homeschool mom on top of all those other hats.
Yeah. So, my husband and I began homeschooling when our oldest was in second grade, was the first year that we homeschooled. He went to a private school for kindergarten and first grade. And then in second grade, we began homeschooling him. Our second was in first grade at that time. Um, and we kind of just jumped in. We were moving across the country, moving several states away from where we lived at the time. And we had kind of always wanted to homeschool, but I worked from home and it just seemed like not really a possibility. But with the move, we decided to jump in. So we began homeschooling and kind of just went with the big box curriculum at first because it was something I knew. I had been homeschooled and I had also taught. So I just kind of went with something I knew real quick. But a couple years into it, we realized it really wasn't what we were looking for. And that's how I found Master Books. And that's how I'm here today.
I'm sure glad you found Master Books. So, part of your story is also you becoming a Master Books author. So, that's a new part of your adventure, and I'm really excited to hear more about that. I see it behind you, the first level of where faith grows. So, that's exciting. There's more levels to come. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So the heart of the Where Faith Grows series is really putting tools in parents' hands so they know how to disciple their children. Throughout scripture, we see over and over that we've been called to disciple our children, but sometimes we need a little bit of assistance with taking it from, just having that knowledge to actual practical implementation of that. So
That's
that is really what Where Faith Grows was written for. It was to give something to the parent that says, this is how you walk it out. And so, I mean, discipleship is really just passing our faith on to our children. And so it doesn't have to be difficult, but it does have to be intentional. And
yes,
so that is what this is doing, is it's just giving you that, hey, let's focus on this. Let's remember this. It's easy to just kind of go through life and forget that, we can't just live day to day. Our children don't know everything that we know, right? Like the
yes,
biblical knowledge that I have, it's easy for me to think, well, my kids have that too.
right.
But they don't. If they haven't been taught, they don't know it. So even for myself, I'm excited about using the course, even though I wrote it, because with my kids, it just gives me that, reminder. Hey, focus on this. Remember, we need to talk about these things. So that's really what the heart behind it all is. Just making discipleship practical for homeschool families.
I feel like it's a fantastic tool to be intentional.
Yes, absolutely. Um, so at the beginning of the course, if you read, there's like a note from me in the front, and that's in the preview if anyone wants to look at that. But in that, I talk a little bit about kind of the state of adults in America today and their views, and how many people have a biblical worldview. And so I'll just kind of give some of those numbers. Um, there's only 6%. This is according to the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University. They conducted the American Worldview Inventory 2020, and they said only 6% of American adults today have a biblical worldview. Um,
Wow, that's stunning.
and it really is. And then if we look at Americans aged 18 to 36, only 2% of them have a biblical worldview. And
Wow.
when we compare this back to the 1990s, in the 90s, 12% of Americans had a biblical worldview. So we see this really steep, like sharp decline that happened. Um, and it's concerning. It's very concerning. And then, in addition to that, with only 2% of that age group having a biblical worldview, 6 out of 10 of millennials call themselves Christians.
Wow.
So we have over 60% calling themselves Christians, but only 2% actually understanding what that is. So there's a really big disconnect here. And my heart is that we can begin to raise up the next generation to not just say, I'm a Christian, but to actually know what that means and how to walk it out.
Yes, I think that's so important, and I do see, as I've reviewed the book, the manuscripts that as they come together for Where Faith Grows, that that is definitely the heart behind that, and it's the tools that you're giving the parents to do, and I think it's fantastic. I wish I had this when my kids were young.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I said before, I'm excited. My kids are excited about using this series. It just makes it so practical in our hands, a really easy way to implement things. And another part of it is that, when we do math, a lot of times we sit down at the table and we pull out a math book, we work on our lesson, we close the math book, we put it away, and we don't really think about it really until the next day. What I would like to see with Where Faith Grows is that it doesn't work the same way as the rest of our courses. What really needs to happen is that it begins to overflow into every area of our life. So there are a lot of extension ideas included in the course to help with that process. So if we're talking about patience, well, we don't just talk about patience when we're looking at the book and then put the book away and then not talk about patience until the next day
Right,
we open up the book.
right.
It's something that we want to be implementing in our lives. And so there's lots of ideas on how we can do that in the day to day, because that's really what matters.
I love
Understanding what patience is isn't helpful if our kids don't know how to actually use patience.
mhm. Great. Can you tell me now, we've covered all the heart stuff and how this tool can be used, but what does a day look like?
So in level one, one lesson covers 2 weeks, and each week is 3 days. So one lesson is 6 days of material. The first 3 days of the lesson are going to be there's a little boy and a little girl named Abby and Maya, and they are going to be sharing their experience with the child. Their parents are discipling them. So they're learning from their parents, and then they're sharing what they're learning with your child. And so that's what the first 3 days look like. They're talking to the child about what they're learning. There's going to be a memory verse that is given at the start of each lesson. Will introduce a concept of God and like an attribute of
Back
God.
up just a little bit on the memory verse, because I think this is really important. The fun that is built into this is amazing. And the first time I read the manuscript, what I fell in love with was the tools that you used to teach memory skills to learn these verses. And so they're not just learning mind tools, but they're acting things out. I don't mean acting out the verse itself, but they might start off saying one part of the verse, crouch down low, and then they come up a little higher for the next part, and then they stand up tall for the rest of it. And you don't just use that for every single one. You bring in a lot of variety as they're learning these verses, that I just think is brilliant. I just love that. And so I didn't want to miss that.
Yeah. I mean, there is so much involved. Like when your child gets their body involved in what they're doing, it's really going to help them. And all of the things that were done, the ideas were done with some kind of like a reasoning behind them. So sometimes it's like they're saying it in a quiet voice, because I think like one of the lessons I remember, they say it in a quiet voice at the beginning because it's like they're telling their family about the information. And then they say it a little bit louder because they're telling more people. And then at the end, they're saying it as loud as they can because they're telling the whole world about the good news. So it's just kind of like fun things like that that are included. Or one of the verses when they're learning about the God creating everything, they kind of act like different things each day that they're working on their memory verse. So like one of the days they pretend like they're a tree springing up, and so there's different things like that just to make it fun for the kids. I want them to enjoy it, not feel like, oh, I have to do this again.
Right,
I want it to be fun for the kids. If they enjoy it, then that's what's going to stick in their mind.
So what are some of the other features that kind of got you
Yeah.
distracted?
So,
Sorry about that. I just love that component of it. That excites me. And I think the kids will be excited by it too.
so there's going to be kind of the three things that are covered. Is there's going to be a memory verse every single lesson. Then there's going to be an attribute of God. We hang out on an attribute of God for 3 lessons, which is going to be for 6 weeks. And the reason why we do that is to help the children really understand who God is. We don't want to just say, God is holy, God is merciful, but not really let them get that deep into their hearts. And so kind of camped out on a concept for quite a while. So that way we can introduce it.
Let's go back a little bit to the statistics that you were giving. Part of today's culture, the issue that we have is that everybody's creating their own God. They don't recognize who the God of the Bible is, because so many people are defining who he is, but it's not accurate. We don't get to just make up what we want. When we do that, it's called an idol. And so we have all these false idols that people are worshiping, and they don't even know it. And so I really love the idea of camping out in who God is for a little bit more extended of a period of time, so that the kids can really immerse themselves in understanding who he is. that this is who the God of the Bible is, not what society is saying, not all these made up idols with the same name.
Yes. So, I mean, that since we camp out, we can kind of go a little bit deeper, and then they can really understand what they're learning. So, the first concept in level 1 is God is trustworthy. So, first we have to explain what is trust? What does that mean? So, once we kind of establish that, then we can explain how God is worthy of our trust, how he is trustworthy. So, that's kind of what we're doing with the attributes of God. So then another part of it is that we talk about a character trait. So each character trait is going to be covered for 2 lessons, which means 4 weeks. Once again, we're still camping out on it for a decent amount of time because we want the child to be able to actually use what they're learning.
But what
So,
I like about it is that even though we're camping out for a little bit longer on some of these topics, it's all fun. It doesn't get boring. It unwraps these topics in just a fun, interactive way that makes it part of life and real.
yes. So that's kind of like if you look at the scope and sequence, those are the 3 things that you're going to see shown for each lesson, what's being covered in those lessons. And then, like I said before, the first 3 days of the lesson are going to be Abby and Maya sharing what their parents have shared with them. For every lesson except lesson 1 kind of sets the foundation for the course. But for lessons 2 through 18, there's always going to be either a passage directly from the Bible, or there's going to be a synopsis from a part of the Bible, to really show that all these things we're learning about, they're in the Bible. That's where we go to learn who God is and to learn how he wants us to live. So those are implemented in the beginning of the lesson as well. And then, so that would be like week 1, right? The 1, 2, and 3, days 1, 2, and 3, that's week 1. Then the second week of the lesson, days 4, 5, and 6. Day 4, if I have to pick my favorite day of the lesson, this is my favorite day. The reason is because day 4 is all about the parent connecting with the child.
Mm-hmm.
So in this one, Abby and Maya are not going to show up on this day. This is where we pull out the Big Thoughts for Little Thinkers books. We sit down on the couch together, we read a little bit in there, and then we talk about what we learned. And it's really just kind of a heart to heart between the parent and the child. And this is where real discipleship takes place. This is where we start really planting those truths down in our children's hearts. And so that's why this is like my favorite day, because I hope that what this does is this builds relationship between the parent and the child. And that's the goal. So that's day 4. Day 5 is going to be it's called an application day. There's some type of an activity to do. It's usually a shorter day, not quite as much as the rest. And then you'll also find all of the extension ideas listed on this day. So you can do more on that day if you'd like, or you could do extension ideas any time of the week. And then the 6th day of the week is kind of the wrap up. We review everything that we talked about during all of the other days. Abby and Maya come back in during this period of time. We review the memory verse all together again. Just kind of a wrap up of what we do. And then the last assignment for the week is that the child will be creating any type of like art piece that they want related to anything that they learned. So they kind of have a little bit of control over this, and they get to do whatever they would like to do, but that's, right in the book for them to do that. So that's kind of how the 6 days of the lesson play out.
Can you tell me a little bit about the journal component?
Yes. So there is a journal component that can be found at the back of the book. And there are a couple pages for each lesson. And the way that the journaling component works is that tracking your child's faith journey is not really a tangible thing, right? Like I can see my child's faith growing, but it's really hard for me to keep track of where they're at. And so the journaling part is trying to take that intangible thing and make it tangible in a certain way so we can look back and we can see, look at how much growth there has been. So the journal is throughout the lesson, there's going to be a couple journaling prompts, and it'll say, journal this, and you'll jot down either your child's responses to your question, or sometimes the parent is sharing their own faith journey, because really that's what discipleship is. And in Deuteronomy, it actually says that when your children ask you why you do these things, you need
Right.
to tell them. You need to tell them about your experiences.
Mhm.
So that's what some of the heart behind that part of it is that the parent is actually going to share about when you were baptized, share about, when you came to faith in Christ. And there's different prompts about you sharing your faith journey. And then you're writing down your child's response to that. What do they think about what you shared with them? So there's going to be lots of different questions. Each lesson, it's not all the same. It's going to look different each lesson. There's a few prompts in there for parents, but parents can use the journal however they would like to. But they just kind of keep track of what's going on in their child's life right then.
And how
And
does
what
the
do they
child
see?
participate? How does the child participate in the journal?
So the journal is going to be written in mostly by the parent, because in level 1, children are very young and they don't have the writing stamina. So the parent will be doing most of the filling out of the part, but we want the children to be included as well. So there's a coloring portion. It kind of switches up. There's 3 different options. So they can color on one, they can doodle on the next week, and they can trace on the other week. And then it'll just kind of cycle through. And then another part of it is that we put a reminder each lesson to take a picture of your child sometime, anytime you want to, whether it's during an activity, whether it's while you're sitting on the couch together, and have yourself in the picture too, and because you're the one who's doing the discipling. So
Right.
the parent should be in the picture too. Have
Mhm.
yourself on the couch together, reading Big Thoughts for Little Thinkers, or, making whatever the recipe is. If there's a recipe that week, you're in the kitchen working together, and then print that picture out and put it in your journal. And it becomes this really beautiful keepsake of what you've done with your child over the year. And you can see all of these concepts at the end of the year, all of these concepts your child has learned. You see the interaction that you've had with your child that you've been able to write down. And then the great thing about that is that Where Faith Grows level 1 is level 1 of a series. So there's going to be 6 levels, and this journaling component is going to follow each level. So it's going to be something that's included every single time. And what's going to happen is, as the levels progress, it's going to switch a little bit to more of the responsibility going on the child for documenting their faith journey, and then the parent having a little bit less and less writing in the journal. But it's still going to be a parent-child activity, so they can keep track of what's going on. And if they go from level 1 through level 6, you have something documenting 6 years of your child's faith growing.
I love this component of it. As a mom that's had 9 children and homeschooling multiples at once, right now I'm homeschooling 4. And, sometimes it's really hard to take time out of the day to really write things down. But what I love about this journal idea is that it's not like I have to sit down and write, chapters worth. The questions you could give short answers, or you could go into more depth if you have time and want to do that. And so it's this building of really that faith journey of not only the parent, but also the child. It's that mixing. I just love it. I love how both sides are represented in this journal, and it's quick and it's easy and it's fun, and the prompts are there. You can choose to do some of the prompts, or if it's busy, you don't have to. Or if there's something that the Lord has just really impressed upon you that you want to write down, And another part of it that I would really encourage families to do is to make sure that you take the time to read what you've written to the child. The child might not have quite the reading abilities yet, to do that on their own, but they'll love going back. I create scrapbooks, and my adult children love to look at their childhood memories. And I think both the parent and the child will look back fondly at these and really remember, and in the process just see the goodness of God and that faithfulness as he helps our children grow, and us as parents being able to not only grow but pass our faith on to the next generation. And so I just love it. It's just a beautiful keepsake, I think, to track that journey. And what better subject to do that in than the Bible and our faith journey?
Yes, absolutely.
So Jessica, tell me what's your vision for the next levels? Like we've already made Where Faith Grows available. The moms and dads can go in. They can take a look at the samples on the moms, or on the master books, not the moms, master books. Sorry about that. The master books website. They can go in. They can check it out. They can see the previews. But what's your vision? What's going on right now? What are you working on in the present to develop this series?
So right now I'm actually in process of creating an academy course to go along with level 1. My goal is that that should be available sometime in the near future. I'm working really hard on that. I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be a really great additional resource for parents. And so I can kind of say a little bit about what I'm thinking with that. The way it's going to work is I want to make sure parents are doing this course with their kids. So the academy course is not a replacement for parents. Even if you're using the academy course, I still think parents need to be sitting with their child and doing it with them. But to make the course a little bit more fun, I actually have 2 of my own children, and they are recording the voices and the conversation between Abby and Maya. So I have one of my boys and my daughter, and we're recording all of the little clips back and forth. And so that way your child could actually listen to Abby and Maya having their conversation. And then I'm recording the Bible's portions. So, and we'll have a couple other like bonus things that I'm throwing in there, some fun stuff. But once again, the parent needs to be sitting with the child and doing this with them. So essentially you can pull it up on your phone while you're sitting there with your child, and you can click play. You listen to the conversation together, just the same way as you would be reading it to your child. It's just that you get to listen to them talking. And then, yes, exactly. And then you'll be able to, complete the lesson together. But I'm excited about that. I think it'll make it really fun. It'll make it feel more realistic even to the kids. So that's the fun thing that's close on the horizon. And then in the future, we have levels 2 through 6. So level 2 is going to be the next one that will be coming out. And that one is going to kind of continue similar to what level 1 is, just kind of taking it a little bit higher level, not necessarily content-wise, because the content that's covered in these courses, you never outgrow, right?
Right.
I mean, for the rest of my life, I'm going to be learning more about who God is and understanding these things about him in a deeper way. So the content is not necessarily changing, but the way it's given, the way it's shared. So we'll start to see that adjust slightly. Level 2 will just be a slight increase, maybe some more writing than what you see in level 1, a little bit more on the student. And then you'll see that progress as we go through the series. As we keep going through, more of the discipleship will be where the child is kind of taking their own faith and making it their own at that point. So as they progress, more responsibility is going to be on the child. The parent is still going to have some levels of responsibility through the whole series. Even at level 6, you're still talking about a young child. So
Mhm,
the parent will still have some levels of responsibility, but as the child matures, they will be able to do more on their own and more can be expected of the child.
I think it's even more important in the later levels. While a parent is required in the younger levels just because of the abilities of the child, as the student progresses, they think deeper, they have more questions. And so the parent does need to be present to answer those questions. And I believe as this series progresses, parents are going to love that they've got a tool that they can answer those questions with. And so it doesn't, you know, cut the parent out. Instead, it gives them the resources that they need so that they can answer those questions and they can have those discussions with the student. And I think that that's really a fantastic way to work through all questions of faith in the Bible.
Yes, absolutely. If you're going to spend time with your child on any topic, this is going to be the most important one. You
Yeah,
know,
I
if
would
I'm
agree.
going to sit down and work with my child on math, I need to be willing to sit down and work with my child on, them really understanding, comprehending who God is and developing their own faith, not my faith. I'm sharing my faith with them so they can develop their own faith.
Right. Yep. And you've done a fantastic job at giving parents the tools to be able to pass that faith on to the next generation. So thank you. I appreciate you joining us and joining me and all the parents out there. It was really a lot of fun to get to know you better, to learn about some of your roles within Master Books, your homeschool journey, and also about where the series Where Faith Grows. And I hope we can have some more talks like this in the future. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Hi, Kristen. Can you tell us about your homeschool journey?
I can. Well, let's see. I have to think back quite a few years. Randy and I have been at this for quite a while. My oldest is Carrie Lindquist, who is also the author of Foundations Phonics and the Let's Talk Science series. And so that just shows you about how long we've been homeschooling. So we started off our homeschool journey just really interested in homeschooling. It really wasn't as well known back then as it is today. It was becoming legal in most states at that point. There was laws being made and precedences set. And so it wasn't quite as scary as the ones before us that jumped into homeschooling, but it was still pretty unknown and kind of out there, pretty fringe. And so when we jumped into it, we didn't even realize that a whole bunch of other people that we knew were jumping into it too. Would have been nice to have all gotten together, but we were kind of all these islands, on our own, learning about homeschooling and then jumping into it. And so my story actually starts off maybe a little different than some. So I can be a little bit stubborn and hard-headed and at times. And so the Lord had really piqued our interest and been leading us to homeschool, before our oldest was even ready to start school. And we kept running into people like in odd places that homeschooled. And it was just fascinating to us. And we actually read some books on education that just kind of said, yeah, this is something we probably should do. And then culturally, of course, just going the wrong path from where we wanted our children to go on a biblical level. And so that was really primarily the reason was we really wanted to instill our own values and to teach our children to go to scripture first for all education, whether you're little or grown. So that's how we got started in the idea of homeschooling, but the actual homeschooling was a little bit rocky. I was very afraid, which is kind of funny now, to teach Carrie how to read. It was very intimidating for me. And so I figured, you know what, I'll send her off to school and we'll let them, teach her. And then Randy actually became the principal of the private school that she was going to. And so I'm like, well, he's there, so we can do first grade too. But deep down, I knew the Lord wanted me to homeschool her. I was supposed to homeschool her from the start. And I will say that it was costly to both me and Carrie. And so, I regret that. That's one of my deepest regrets about homeschooling is I didn't just start right off and trust the Lord to give me the tools that I needed to teach her to read. And so really I went off path out of fear. And like I said, it was costly. But God is good and he's gracious. And so he made it very, very clear. I was on my back, unable to move. I had a very bad infection. And it was in that point that God said, okay, are you ready now? And it was loud and clear. And I said, yeah, okay. So that's how he got my attention, because he had plans that I was unaware of. And he had plans for my children, he had plans for our family, he had plans for me. And I was disrupting it all through my disobedience, that was out of fear. And so I just want to encourage people, don't do what I did. When the Lord calls you to it, just do it. Could have saved myself some grief and my daughter some grief. And so anyway, we began homeschooling about halfway through her first grade year, and we've been doing it ever since. We have not looked back. It's been a wonderful lifestyle, a wonderful journey, a wonderful opportunity to really share our faith and to educate our children in the admonition of the Lord. And so that was our beginning. As the other children became of age, we just continued on homeschooling, including our adopted son who has fetal alcohol syndrome. It's actually been really good for him too. He's gotten to achieve a lot more than what he would have in a traditional classroom. And so I wasn't about to make that mistake again out of fear and not homeschool him too. So it's been an exciting journey, and it's, led us to where we are today.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. I know that's a huge encouragement to so many families that are feeling that fear or that nervousness about homeschooling. So let's talk about what you do for Masterbooks. You are the brand and curriculum manager. So what does that mean? What is it that you actually do?
Okay, there's a few different areas that involves, and the first one is just to look at a lot of different materials, a lot of submissions, and recommend those to our team, and to just look for the holes that we're looking for in the big picture, because we offer a lot of different things, and so when I look through, pre-K all the way to graduation, I do an analysis of all the courses that we have, and then I look at where the holes are. And then when we get course submissions, or we have authors that are interested in writing for us, I can look at those different areas and see, well, we already have 5 different solutions, so we're not ready for that. Where there are holes, we can start looking for authors to write for us if there aren't any that have already submitted courses. So I help with that. I also helped him with the contract process, just making sure he has all the information that he needs. And so just working between Tim and the author to get all that, just the basic I's dotted, T's crossed, everybody has what they need to finish the contract process. So that's the first thing that I do. The pre-contract process. And then I also work with the manuscript. I work closely with Laura, who is our editor-in-chief, on the manuscript itself. We work with the author to just improve, make some changes, just getting that manuscript to where it needs to be before it gets handed over to the design process. Once the design team starts their work on the manuscript, then at certain points in it, I review it along with a whole bunch of other people. Everybody takes, their turn looking at it. I'm specifically looking to see how the course is operating. Is the design achieving our goals for the course? Are we reducing friction points? Those sorts of things. So I check in on it. And I usually am part of the last review as well before it gets sent off to the printer. And I think I'm checking my notes here real quick, but I think that's everything that I do when it comes to the actual manuscripts. So then I also switch hats a little bit on the brand side. And that part of it, I step in and help out with the Moms of Master Books and the app. I help monitor the comments that are coming in. One of the important things that I do is I watch for the suggestions. I watch for how our customers are using the materials, the things that they love, the suggestions that they have for improvements. And I just funnel all that through and send that feedback on to the team so that we can improve the curriculum that we have, and also we can make adjustments to manuscripts in the future. And one thing that I really love about Master Books is Tim is fantastic about making sure we're doing updates every time that there is a new printing. And so whenever we reprint things, we make minor little tweaks and just improve and fix it. And so I feel like we're just real nimble in that, where a lot of companies, it could be 5-10 years before any changes are made to their books. And so I love that. And so that's a big part of what I do with this brand management part of things. I also review the catalog. I review different marketing things, back a book copy, stuff like that. And I also, one thing that I love is I attend at least one convention a year, sometimes more, but I try to make sure that I get to at least one, which is usually the one in Nashville, which is actually getting changed to Pigeon Forge this year, the TTD conference. And what I love about that is I'm out there talking with the moms, getting to encourage them directly, and also getting feedback on the whole homeschool market, what the needs are, how they're using our materials, how we can improve them, and how we can just better meet their needs. And so my whole goal is to make sure that the curriculum that we're providing is easy to use, that the students are connecting with it. And that's just, I just have this vision of books going down an assembly line on a roller. I want to make sure that those rollers are moving smoothly. And it's not about the rollers. It's about connecting with the Word of God. It's taking away all the distractions so that the student can receive all that they can of a biblical foundation. And so that's why I do what I do, is because it's important to me that children have a strong biblical foundation before they hit that world that just wants to tell them everything but, that wants to attract them with all these false ideas about God.
Amen. I think all of us appreciate what you're doing too. So let's talk about the fact that you do all that for Masterbooks. So you have a huge role that you play, but that's not all that you do. You are also an author. You have authored the Language Lessons for a Living Education series. So let's kind of shift gears, talk about that a little bit. Why did you write this series, and what sets the Language Lessons series apart from other language courses that are on the market?
Yeah, those are really great questions. So the why is really simple. we needed a language arts curriculum published by Masterbooks. That was one of the holes that I said we had, and I kept saying we need it, and I kind of expected it would be a group effort, but it fell in my lap, and so I became the author. And it really came, though. It the course doesn't just fill a Masterbooks hole. The course fills a homeschooling hole, because I've worked with a lot of different homeschool moms. For years, I was a chapter leader for our local homeschool group. We also had our own curriculum company where we were the resellers of all sorts of publishers' curriculum. And so I would answer even local people's questions, just, hey, what should I use for my kid for language arts in third grade? And, they just weren't liking what was out there. And I never could tell them, this is what I would recommend. This is my favorite. I just didn't have a favorite. I ended up piecing together from here and there and kind of putting together my own program. And so what I did, I decided that if I was going to author a language arts program, then it was going to be one that was designed the way I wanted to use it, meet the needs of my kids, assuming that was going to meet the needs of a lot of other kids out there. And that indeed has been the case. And so when I sat down trying to design it, one of the big issues that I've had is the developmental appropriateness of a lot of curriculums out there. And so I have my little third grade boy who, wants to be running, jumping, doing, and not as wanting to connect verbally or in written sentences, let alone learn about grammar. And so, by that point, some of these curriculums are wanting them to write a whole paper. And my kids, I can't even get them hardly to write a really good paragraph. And they weren't so different from my friends' kids. And so it really became a source of contention for a lot of us, these curriculums that just, for those rock stars out there that love to write. And I had some friends that had kids like that. And I'd be like, wow, how did you do that? But what I found is it's just the way God made them. And so I wanted a curriculum that child could take off, but we didn't leave behind the average kids. And so I wanted a real practical course that took all the different parts of language arts. And really, all language arts is communication. Really, that's a better title. It's communication. And so, I felt like a lot of programs were disjointed. We have our grammar over here, our spelling over here, our writing over here, our reading over here. And while we can study those things as separate entities, we really need to bring them all together and merge them. We need listening skills. We need verbal skills. We need writing skills. We need to know how to spell. We need to make sure that we have proper structure. And that's also that people can understand us and we can understand them. And so there were all these things going on in my head as I was working to create the structure for the series. And I think it came together. It really does what I needed it to do. And I've been using it with my sons. They're, aging out of it, which is really sad. But we're going into writing strands, which is, we're really looking forward to that. But I've had a lot of fun watching my boys use the curriculum and do really well with it, and hearing from so many whose kids are thriving with the Language Lessons for a Living education program.
Absolutely. And I mean, my family is one that has benefited from what you've done, because I felt the same way as you. all these other curriculums out there had all these disjointed pieces, and language lessons just simplified everything.
Mhm.
And my kids are thriving. And we've had the opportunity that we've been able to use all of the levels of the series. We've used levels 1 through level 6. And um, I don't think there's anything else that even comes close to it out there. So, can you talk a little bit on the practical side of things? How are the different aspects of language arts covered through the series? You said they kind of work together. So, how are they addressed?
Okay, how it all works is on the first day there's usually some sort of a special feature, and it can be a reading passage. I love the use of co-reading. I just don't see it used, and it's something that's really a lot of fun. Like, there's read alouds, and I've always had my kids read aloud, but especially as they were learning to read, I found it, and I didn't do it as much as I should have. If I had to do it all over again, I would have used this method a lot more. But sometimes I would grab a book, and their reading skills were limited, but their understanding was certainly there of these words. And so that's really the difficulty with younger level kids, is they can understand a whole lot more than what they can actually read. And so we would just grab a book, and I would read part of it, and then I would point to different words, and they would get to read those words as we read through a passage of this book. And so I thought that was a fantastic tool. My kids loved it. And so that's what I integrated into the language lesson series. Another part of it is you, as the parent, are going to pick additional reading. So I'm expecting students to be doing more reading than what's actually specifically assigned. But your children best. You know their interests, their reading level, all of those things. So before the series even begins, I recommend picking out additional readers that are appropriate for that level. And that's what I do. My boys and I, we sit down, we say, okay, what are the books that you're going to read? And I do that anyway, no matter what curriculum I'm using. We set aside that time. And so the reading component of it is twofold, where you're doing the co-reading, and you're also assigning outside books that are of interest and of value to your particular family. Um, and then sometimes it's a picture study, and people don't always understand the value of picture study. And picture studies can be done for multiple reasons. In the language lessons, it's to fill the student's mind with details to help them actually draw from when it's time for them to write. And so they may include, a picture of, or a story that there's a yellow sun, and they had just seen that in the picture study and might not even realize that's why they're using it, or some other detail, or they might be inspired to write about something. So it helps the student pay attention to details, and that's partly why picture studies used. So there's all these different tools on that first day that helps a child interact with language and with more of a broad look into things, and that they're going to carry over in ways that you might not realize that are transferring. On the second and third day of the week, they're mostly focusing on like your grammar, your punctuation, those sorts of things. But they're also applying it. They're reading, they're having to read the information, but they're also applying it by writing sentences using, like, the different, say they're studying adjectives, they're actually going to write a sentence using adjectives. The fourth day is usually some sort of an application. It's usually interacting with, not in every level, but in some of the levels, it's interacting with some outside books. And then on the last day is spelling. It's where all of the spelling words are given, and they work with the spelling words.
Okay, great. So in relation to grammar, you kind of brought that up. That's covered on days 2 and 3. A
Mhm.
question that we get a lot is about sentence diagramming. So, is sentence diagramming included when you're teaching grammar skills, and why or why not?
Well, Jessica, that's a rather polarizing question, but it's an excellent question. So yeah, there's all these different people. People basically either love diagramming or they hate diagramming. And as you know, we try to reduce friction points wherever there's a strong feeling. We like to leave that at the parent's discretion. And so while that could be something that's added as an extra book, extra help down the road. Right now, it's not a core part of the language lesson series, but that's not to say that they don't learn about parts of speech and grammar. They absolutely do. It just doesn't use the tool of sentence diagramming because some kids just freeze up and it really becomes a source of contention. And so I didn't want those students to miss out on the love of communication just because diagramming wasn't the way that they learn best. Now, if your student loves diagramming, then yeah, I recommend adding diagramming into what you do because that can be a real help. And that's part two of the Master Books way. We expect families to use our curriculum as a tool and adapt it in the way that's best for them. I've always done that with every curriculum I've ever used. And so I wanted to build that into my curriculum and all the curriculum that I have a hand in with Master Books to create them and structure them in such a way that a parent can easily adapt to meet the needs of their own students. I actually adapt the language lessons series to my own boys. And so, whether I'm using level 5, level 6, they just are all finishing up level 6. I have changed level 6 in ways to meet the needs of 3 different boys with 3 different strengths and weaknesses, learning styles, interests. And so I want families to adapt them. So feel free to add in diagramming.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like you said, all the parts of speech are covered. Those are taught. And so you could easily implement diagramming even with the sentences that are given as examples, the sentences that the child is writing. So you could
Right,
definitely implement it without much extra work. Um,
right.
and then let's talk about another aspect, spelling. You mentioned spelling words are introduced on day 5. Could we talk about the spelling approach? Why is it on day 5? How can families utilize the spelling in language lessons?
Okay, well, students tend to learn spelling best by writing. So spelling was a tough one for me. It's literally impossible to create a spelling program that's going to work for all kids. In my experience, kids are just born wired to spell easily well, where other kids just struggle. It does, there's no magic curriculum that's going to turn your kid that struggles with spelling into this fantastic spelling over, kid that can spell overnight. Chances are they're probably going to struggle with spelling their whole life. And your kid who just it comes naturally and easily is probably going to just continue to do that their whole life, whatever you do for spelling. Now, does that mean that we just throw it out the window? No, don't worry about the kid that, doesn't spell well. Well, some of mine, I do graduate them to autocorrect and that sort of thing. But they have to be able to at least spell the first few letters and you can't help them improve. And so number one, I didn't want to make spelling a source of contention and a pain point throughout the whole curriculum for the student that really struggles to spell. But I also didn't want to not cover it because we want kids to understand that it is important to spell words correctly. And so finding that balance, and also knowing that if you talk to a bunch of moms in a room, they're all going to tell you their favorite spelling program, and chances are they're not going to give it up. And so how do I make spelling in a way that they can just leave that off without having to create a ton of work for them. And so those are the questions and the things that I pondered as I went, as I was thinking about spelling. And so we relegated it to day 5 just so that the student can use a different program if they're needed. They can focus on that day, or they can spread it across the other 4 days. But beyond that, I also feel like spelling shouldn't be limited to a list. And so rather than focusing on that list the other 4 days, I would really prefer that students focus in on spelling correctly the sentences that they're writing and using, and making it more of a practical thing. But then on day 5, hey, here's some other words that you can work at, that you can be writing, that you can be learning about and using. And so for me, that's enough. Even for I have a son that struggles in spelling, and he just asked me how to spell words, and that he doesn't know, and I just spell it for him. What they're learning in language lessons with syllables is really helpful, because I can chunk it up into syllables for him. And then as he progresses, I can tell him 2 syllables at a time. With how to spell a word. And so then eventually we get so that we're spelling the whole word. So I'll spell the entire thing out for him. So I don't feel the need, even with him, to just be giving a lot of spelling tests. In fact, I don't give him any spelling tests. I let him work with the words in language lessons. I let him work with words in his writing. And when he doesn't know how to spell something, I let him ask, I spell it for him, and I have him correct the spelling in anything that he writes that he spelled something wrong. So that's the method behind it all. With that being said, again, I expect parents to adapt it. So if you love to give spelling tests, you can always introduce the words at the beginning of the week. You can be working with those words all week long. There's lots of ideas to take it further in the back of the book. There's lots of games and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of ways that you can involve spelling in the rest of the week. It doesn't have to stay just on that one day where they focus on it. I will say that if you do give a spelling test, focus on the words that they didn't get right, rather than the whole list every single day, because there's really no need to focus on the ones they already know how to spell. That gets boring. And it doesn't really serve a purpose. So if you're going to spend time every single day working on these spelling words, focus on the ones that they have trouble remembering.
Yeah, I know that's something that I hear a lot of parents say that they do, where they kind of introduce the words at the beginning of the week, and then any that the child has right, they kind of just check off. Any that the student still needs some assistance with, that's what they're working with. So that's
right.
great.
And they can use those lists in the back of the book, where you can actually, there's a place to
Yes.
check as a student has mastered those words, and that just helps narrow it down so you can focus on those other words. And I would even have them write those words in context, and so write a sentence, not just a list of words, because I cram for all sorts of spelling tests, and I would pass the spelling test no problem, but then when I was actually writing it, I might forget how to spell a word that I had aced on a spelling test, because it went into my short-term memory and not my long-term memory. And at Masterbooks, we really try to develop a whole child approach. And so we want to integrate into real life the things that we've learned, rather than just cramming for tests.
Yeah. So you mentioned that the back of the book has some spelling ideas in it. There's a lot in the back of the book. So can you talk a little bit about what can we find back there? I know sometimes parents will get to the end of the year and they'll go, I didn't know all this was back here. So we definitely want people to know it's back there. What is back there?
Well, I highly encourage moms to sit down with their curriculum and really look at what's in the front of books, what's in the back of the books, especially with master books, because in the front of the book, we talk about everything that's in the whole book, including the back of the book. And then if you look into the back of the book, you're going to find often a lot of really helpful resources that are going to help you tailor the course to your family, to your student, because that's what we want you to do. And so we really try to give lots of extension ideas that aren't necessarily core that you have to do, but ways that you can go deeper. And so with language arts, the lessons are very short. Um, some students may need a little extra practice now. And I also want to say that when it comes to language arts, students are going to learn about, adjectives and parts of speech every single year. I don't expect them to have it mastered by the end of the year, because all language arts curriculum you will find cover those things every single year. And that's because it takes that long for students to actually get it into their long-term understanding and being able to use it on a practical level. And so they review it and they remember a little more, a little more, a little more, until finally they have the big picture before they enter middle school. And so they're going to continue to practice that every single year. However, some students just have trouble grasping, like, say, what an adjective is. And so you can go to the back of the book and you can find all sorts of games and fun ways to get more practice with adjectives. Because one of the pet peeves that I have of other traditional type curriculum is they just give my student more of the same. So if they're already shutting down because they can't find the adjectives in the first 5 sentences that they work with, another 10 to 15 sentences of identifying adjectives probably isn't going to help. And it's going to end in a lot of tears and frustration. So rather than giving the student just sentence after sentence after sentence to work with, let's switch it up a little bit. Let's find adjectives in a little different of a context, in a little different way of interacting. God created us with 5 senses. And so sometimes it really helps to use a different part of our brain, a different part of our body, to learn something that we're having a hard time understanding through one dimension. And so if you look back there, there's just a wealth of information that you can use. There's also a whole list of things that they're covering that you can tear out and keep even in a separate notebook handy if you want them to use it as reference. So there's just so many tools back there. It's really a shame if you miss out on using them.
Yeah. I love the reference pages in the back. I love to take those out and put them in a separate binder, because then when they need help, maybe in a separate subject, it's really easy for them to access that and look at it without feeling like I have to get my language book out, to look this information up. Instead, it's
Right.
kind of like a place where, oh, I keep my notes in here. So that's,
And what I like about what you're doing with that is helping the students to understand that language arts actually applies to all their other subjects, because that's a part of learning and communication. These other science, history, these are authors communicating to us, and then we're responding with our own communication. And so they're starting to bridge that understanding of, oh, I'm learning all that over here so that I can use it in all these other areas that involve communication.
yes, exactly. I mean, really, we're doing our language subject so we can do all the other subjects. That's the
Exactly.
reason why we're using it. Um,
Yes.
okay, so if someone is looking at starting with the language lesson series, how would they know where to start at?
Okay, it's really important that you start any of our subjects, but especially language arts and math, in the right place. And so a lot of companies have their own placement guides or placement tests. We have a placement test for math, and we have a placement guide for the language lesson series. That's available online. But what I would like parents to focus on when they're placing their student is the writing abilities rather than the reading abilities, because your child's understanding of the world is very big, but sometimes translating that can be difficult. And so their language arts is mostly about the written word. And so that's where their stamina comes into place. And it's also why I don't choose all of the reading, because a student can really struggle in reading but be able to write, or be a fantastic reader. One of my sons, he excelled. I mean, he was little. He was like first grade, and he could read his older sister's college biology textbook and understand what it said. But his writing abilities was not there, I can tell you that. And so I want kids to have the ability to work at their reading level anywhere that happens to be. And so you're going to really foster that reading level by giving them appropriate reading books at their level, but we're going to teach them the writing skills that they need through the worksheet pages and the assignments that they have to do. So you just want to make sure that the student is placed properly with their writing skills once they're reading. So I'm talking level 2 and up. If they are still working on their reading skills, then you're going to look at Foundations Phonics in level 1. And so how that's set up is you can either use Foundations Phonics as their kindergarten curriculum and use level 1 as their first grade curriculum. There's schedules to do that. But what we highly recommend is using Foundations Phonics for the first half of first grade and Language Lessons 1 for the second half, because that's more developmentally appropriate. And so if you have a question and you're just not sure, go with the student's writing ability over their reading ability, and then just, do what's appropriate for reading.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So kind of to wrap up, sort of, if we have somebody who's gone through the series, if we have a child that's gone through the series, what skills would I expect my child to have by the end of level 6?
Okay, that's a really good question, because different programs expect different things from students. And the approach that I take is that it really doesn't do my students any good to learn how to write papers if they can't even write a good paragraph. And by writing a good paragraph, there's so many different components that a student has to have down to write a good paragraph. So they have to be starting their sentences with a capital letter, ending it with punctuation. That in itself is a huge challenge, especially with boys. And so, I mean, and I don't want to take away, because some boys are fantastic writers. I've known boys that are just fantastic, but sometimes they're in a hurry to get outside and do, instead of spending time with the details and getting it done right. So just getting those basic skills, they have to have that down. Well, we also have to have a cohesive sentence. And so we have to teach them how to write a sentence on one topic versus throwing everything in the kitchen sink into this long rambling sentence and paragraph. And so, that's important. And then we're teaching them too how to make it interesting. We don't want just the same sentence structure over and over again, and no adjectives, no adverbs, nothing that makes it interesting to the senses or anything like that. And so what I find is a lot of curriculum just dumps a lot of stuff on the student, has them writing these great big long pieces, but the student still is not writing a really good paragraph. And so that's where I stay focused through sixth grade. We do expand beyond just one paragraph by then, but that's what the focus is. It's let's really develop a good paragraph before we get into longer pieces. So by the end of sixth grade, they should have a basic understanding of grammar and how that's used in their writing, a basic understanding of a variety of sentence structures, how to put together a good solid paragraph, and how to make it interesting to the reader. And then they should be ready to go into middle school. And that's where I would expect the student to develop the skills to write these longer papers, so that by the time they enter high school, they're ready to write at a high school level, because that's the goal in the end. And it doesn't do us any good to continue to spin our wheels doing things, that aren't real great and just doing more of it. And so that's why I really hone in on that paragraph structure.
Great. That's great. So I think that's pretty much finishes up the questions that I had for you. So thank you, Kristen, for sharing with us about your personal life and what you do with Masterbooks, and then also the language lesson series. It was a lot of fun to talk with you. For information about any of the products that we've been discussing, you can visit masterbooks.com.